Hey there, I'm Paul Muller, host of the AI Forecast, Data and AI in the Cloud Era, a weekly podcast proudly sponsored by Cloudera that explores the past, present and future of data and AI in the enterprise. This is another instalment in a series of recordings we made in New York City at Cloudera's Evolve 24 event, a great event which brought together some of the brightest minds in data and AI to look at the latest innovations, success stories and what's to come. Now for this week's episode. Today we're going to take a look at an area that's possibly neglected as we think about all of the hype and excitement around AI, and that is, getting your data right. And to do that, it's my pleasure to be joined by Andrew Brust, who's the CEO of Blue Badge Insights. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great having you here. We're in your hometown, is that right?
We're very much in my hometown. I grew up walking distance from here.
That's fabulous. It is probably my favorite city in the world, so I feel at home when I come to New York. I lived in the States for a while, and I was over in the West Coast.
Okay.
And I would occasionally fly to New York to relax, which every one of my West Coast friends thought was crazy.
Counterintuitive, yeah.
But I find I'm at my calmest in New York.
Sure. Well, we're on the West Coast of Manhattan now, so it's congruent.
I love it. Hey, listen, we're going to talk about, I'm really excited to talk about this topic of data governance and data hygiene. But before we do that, we do a little thing we call the Fast Four. Just opportunity for our audience to get to know our guests through a slightly different lens. You ready to
Sure.
Ready to play the game?
Sure.
Let's do this thing. All right, first question I ask, actually everyone I meet for the first time, is what would your friends, the people who know you best, say is your superpower?
Since we started talking about New York, I'll just say that a lot of my friends think I know a lot of real specific trivia. Mm-hmm. An example is, I can tell you from the pier number what cross street we're at, as long as we're on the west side. So we're on Pier 59 right now.
That's right.
19th Street. It's a simple formula, actually. You subtract 40.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, now I feel
Most people don't know that.
Now I feel like a New Yorker. That is great.
Only works on the west side.
Absolutely fabulous stuff. All right. Next question. What would you say is the most impactful technology in history?
Of course, that's hard to pick, but I don't know. I grew up on television, and when I got my first VCR, I just thought that was the coolest thing. Most people don't even know how to spell VCR anymore, but I think because it gave control to the consumer, it changed the way we watch television. I would argue it's led right up to the streaming platforms we have right now, and I think it ultimately changed technology from something you just consume to something you interact with.
Yeah, I love that one. And just as you mentioned VCRs, I just instantly had a flashback to finding my VCR not working one day, pushing the little door open. All the young people are wondering what we're talking about.
Right.
Pushing the little door open and finding my daughter, who was 3 at the time, had pushed a peanut butter sandwich through it, which didn't work, clearly. Anyway, on to the next question.
It's a downside of the front-loading model.
Yeah, right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Heaven knows what you would have done with the top loader. Anyway, onto the topic of AI.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your own perspective, there's a lot of imagineering going on around artificial intelligence at the moment, people imagining new use cases. From a personal perspective, what problem or process would you like to see AI automate for you to be more helpful?
There again, a range of choices. I would enjoy if AI really helped people come up the learning curve on any given skill. Not that it sort of made it unnecessary for them to learn, but that it could really optimize their learning path and help them, and basically help distill things down so that they could focus on the stuff that's really important. And that could be in any discipline, certainly not only technology. And if we could get to that point, and I think we're a long way from it actually, but if we could get to that point, I think that would be really helpful to society. Rather the opposite, for example, from AI making automated decisions about whose resume is good or bad. Look at it from the other side. How can we construct things with AI rather than just triage things and eliminate things? That's, I don't know, perhaps a little utopian, but that's where I am with it.
No, I love it. I think that's a really noble cause. I'm popping that in my filing cabinet for use later. Conversely,
yeah,
would you like to see a human in the middle, a human be in the loop, as it were, when it comes to AI?
Well, actually, anything where people are eliminated, I think, requires a lot of good, vigilant auditing and oversight. I'm also finding that most of the writing that's coming out of AI is quite cliche and kind of polluting. It's not really helping distill things down. I don't think that that's because AI can't do better there. I just think it's because it hasn't been a major priority for the people designing the models. So I guess in all cases, all your questions are sort of leading me to saying I'm hoping that the priorities around AI and the intent behind what it's going to help people do gets to be more contributory and less, I don't know, less purely profit oriented and purely productivity oriented.
Yeah, no, I get it. I know. Your point about the cliche is interesting. I recently was using ChatGPT, and I thought to myself, there's something I'm not enjoying about the output. And you're right, it was this sort of anodyne sense of, it was a little, waffly is not even the right word. It was like telling me something I already knew in a really, I mean, it's a lot better than having to read it all yourself, read 100 journals to summarize it, but it definitely got the sense of you could do better.
Yeah, and it almost talks down to you sometimes, and that's not helpful.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Last but not least, I'm a big believer that, especially as you go through your life as an executive, part of what got you to where you were is your intuition or maybe a sense of experience that you build up around how you filter, how you process. What are the tips and tricks you use to, and traps maybe you avoid as you process and interact with data as a human? Just curious, what are some of the things you've noticed about your own patterns of behavior with data that have helped you get to where you are?
Well, I think something that's been underappreciated in the database and analytics world literally for decades is just the importance of cataloging it and managing it and keeping it clean. That's always seemed like a chore to most people. It's changing now, mostly out of the selfish motivation of penalties for regulatory noncompliance. Hey, if that's what it takes, fine. But it would be really good if people kind of said, all right, getting this data in a really nice shape is going to be the means to lots of different ends. And instead of looking at that as a burden and a tax, that's actually the substance of working with data, is getting it clean and getting a kind of intimacy with it.
I think that's incredibly profound and something to dwell on. In fact, it's a great segue to what we're about to talk about.
Excellent.
Before we do, though, I was going to say, I'll tip you later. I wanted just a little bit about your background.
Sure.
How did you come to be an analyst and find yourself doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I came in kind of sideways. I started as a what we then called a programmer, and then that sort of became more elevated to developer. But I was actually a computer science major in college. It's funny because not a lot of people in the industry are. So I was always interested in computers, literally from like the 7th grade. Mm-hmm. So I was a programmer. I became a consultant on Wall Street. I ran my own small consulting firm. I sold it to a larger one, but it was still boutique sized, and helped run that. I got very kind of involved with one of the bigger software companies in the industry and learned a lot from that, and also learned a lot about competitive analysis and competitive intelligence. And what happened actually is that people in the tech press started coming to me for quotes a lot of the time. And at first I said, well, I don't know anything about that, if I didn't know anything about that. Then I realized that happens more often than not. If I did some quick studying, I could provide a pithy quote, even for stuff where I didn't have expertise originally. And that made me realize that it's possible to learn about other parts of the industry that I might not specialize in. And so I kind of became, as a hobby, a news junkie around the industry, and started kind of talking about it, pontificating about it a little bit, I guess. And then I said, instead of this being my hobby, what if I could actually make it my my career. So I got my feet wet writing one very in-depth report about all the BI and data visualization tools that were on the market at that time. And that was about, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, I guess. I don't know. Eventually, my desire for talking about what's going on in the industry and looking at trends and patterns, seeing them emerge and seeing them reemerge, gave me a sense that I could talk about what's happening and ultimately make it so that people could understand a particular category or subcategory of technology in less time than it would take them to kind of wade through it all by themselves. Ultimately, if I can distill things down and get somebody up to speed in an hour or two, then I think I've done my job well. And that's how I got there. First, just kind of an outside interest, then a sense that I could do a good job, and then a kind of passion around it.
I love it. That's a great story. So you mentioned that analyst world. I think we've all consumed analyst reports and content. I know I have, but I don't know if I've ever spent that much time, despite having had many analyst friends now that I think about it, ever asking what a day in the life of an analyst looks like.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how that process works.
A lot of it really is being a good student of what's going on, and that could be me kind of reading other people's stuff and just being a consumer and a participant the way that anybody could. It gets, I suppose, more in depth when I take briefings with vendors who are telling me about new technologies that they're working on and which they'll introduce, and then ultimately kind of theme and variation, taking all this technical detail and trying to get it down into plainer English if possible. I do that kind of repeatedly. And a lot of what guides me, honestly, is pet peeves. If I see something in the industry that annoys me, I try and learn more about it. And that actually, I don't know, it's arbitrary, I suppose, but it gives me a structure for how I see what the problem is, how I see what the solution is, and how I explain it to people.
I love it. And what a great motivator.
So I don't have the definitive answer for what an analyst is, but I get to use the badge of an analyst, and that's what I do.
No, I love it. And I think what I'm taking as I'm listening to you is that as you say, you sit somewhere in my mind by just listening to the description between the university student and the university lecturer who's effectively synthesizing a corpus or body of work and saying, hey, let me teach you about physics. You don't need to read the entire set of books. Here are the pages that are really going to matter to you, and then let's maybe do a lecture or talk to bring you up to speed, and fast forward you through 200 years of history to get you to the stuff that matters. Is that a bad analogy?
It's not a bad analogy. It may be a little loftier than what I actually do every day, but that's it. That's at least the goal. Yeah,
I love it.
That kind of efficiency.
I love it.
Sure.
Well, you talked about your areas of focus being your pet peeves. I almost feel like asking, so what are your pet peeves at the moment? Or put differently, what are some of the significant trends you're seeing out there that are gathering your attention?
A lot of it is around data management, and there's different facets there. So the first facet is, because I write a lot of analyst reports, which break things down into categories and subcategories, that's a tough thing to do because it creates a kind of a segregated area to look at the tech. But really, all these subcategories are starting to overlap and bleed into each other. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like if the visualization would be something kind of throbbing, where they're growing and overlapping and then kind of contracting again as innovation takes place in the subcategories. So there's this kind of pendulum swing of things being like each other and then things being unique, and I don't know. That's a big deal, and the other big deal is that people are more interested in it now. It used to seem really dry, and quite frankly, the state of the art was kind of dry when it came to things like data catalogs and ETL and that sort of thing. But people now, I think, are starting to see the whole end-to-end spectrum of things, and that managing data is a means to an end. And that gives it a lot more meaning for people, I think. And so instead of it just seeming like some impediment or some obstacle, now it seems to some people, I guess, more like an enabler. And I think that's really good.
Well, and listening to what you were saying had me reflect on topics like data governance and data intelligence, which even as little as a couple of years ago, people were looking at you going, oh, you must be from the compliance department.
Right.
And I won't say a dirty word, but I mean, no one ever likes it when compliance comes knocking, right? It usually means something's gone wrong, or they're going to make it really hard for you to do your job to prevent something going wrong. Again, perception, not necessarily reality. Whereas now it feels to me as though those things are seen as being, if not so much enablers, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but being necessary in order, foundational, there's the word, before you can confidently progress to the next level. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good articulation of what I was sort of alluding to before, which is that people are now seeing this less as just, work that must be slogged through, and as you said, seeing it as a building block to getting them to the point where they can get a lot of value out of their data. You asked me for pet peeves, and I didn't give you one. I actually said what I'm happy about. But the converse of that is when people don't see the value in these things, that is my pet peeve. And when vendors don't see the value of it, ultimately, I think, and I've said this to different vendors at different times, if data technology is going to be really good, it actually has to be fun. And the word fun seems trivial, right?
Yeah.
But if we want people to get data literate, if we want people to get really facile with their data, if we want them to get tenacious at analyzing it, then they have to be enjoying it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And to say that data management and data governance has to be fun is probably doubly daft. But I think we're getting there. We're seeing now where governance tools are not just locking things down, but they're also making things more discoverable. They're also making data sets more understandable. They're also making it easier for different business units to share their data and make it more usable. And so I think that goes right with what I was saying before. Ultimately, it's about making it more fun. It's still work, right? But the work should be enjoyable and satisfying, and not just effort.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, and sorry, I'm going completely off piste, as is my want. You got me thinking about there's a number of citizen science projects where they've gamified the process of taking very noisy. Now, it's not, well, I guess it's semi-structured data, so it's things like astronomical images, searching for near-Earth objects and so forth, where they farm it out to humans to go through and process. And I suppose my point is they've made what is a pretty dull task, that they've made it fun, they've gamified it. Do you see that as being even remotely applicable, concepts like that, to the enterprise, or is that just me stretching it too far?
The concept of kind of delegating out some of the work?
Or, no, not so much externally, but even internally, and providing that sort of gamification. I mean, we have bug hunt rewards at the moment.
Right.
For bugs, point. Right? But, where are the data bug rewards? Like, how do we...
Is that hackathons and so forth. Yeah.
Literally an idea that just occurred to me as we're talking about. No one's ever talked about making data governance fun in my presence. Let's put it that way. So you've sparked some ideation.
It's contrarian, to say the least.
Oh, I love it. I think it's a brilliant idea, because we all know stinky data when we smell it, right? And most of us don't have an avenue to do anything about it.
I think it's important for most practitioners, and by the way, practitioners could be business people who are using data tools and don't identify as data specialists or professionals, but practitioners should do some of the low-level grunt work just to understand the intricacies of it, learn it, and then delegate a lot of that effort to tools. And then that will, I believe, give them the right instinct to audit what the tools are doing, right? And not just be a token human in the loop, but be an informed human in the loop. That's how I think we get the best productivity. Learn the low-level stuff, and then assemble that into higher-level actions and use tools.
I like it. So in terms of what organizations can do about this data hygiene problem, what's your advice to them?
My first piece of advice would be see the value in it, because if you have lousy data, that is I mean, like you said, it's foundational, but it's going to be a weak foundation. And you're going to build thing upon thing over it, and the efficacy of those things is not going to be good, right? And when the ultimate thing is an AI model. So if you've got lousy data and you're going all the way up to building an AI model on top of it, that AI model will look authoritative, and it will be a charlatan, an artificial charlatan, rather than something that's artificially intelligent. And that's frightening. So
it really is.
People should feel that fear,
yeah,
and then say, so we bring them down, but then we bring them back up, and we say, with the right focus on data cleanliness and hygiene and governance and kind of due diligence, we can be at a point where we don't have to have that fear. Right, and then everybody, I think, will have the right ethos.
No, I think that's fabulous. I've got to ask: are there any more peeves?
Well, I guess a big peeve actually is around AI, not the issue I just identified with maybe models that are built on data that isn't clean, but generative AI is a tough thing, right? In my experience as an analyst, most technology things are either hype or they're substantive. Generative AI is this weird cocktail of the two, and it's roughly about 80% hype and 20% like real gems, real pearls of value in there. But it's tough because going through hype uses a lot of cycles, right? It leads you down the wrong paths. It gets you to a point where things are not going to be so productive and not so rewarding, and definitely not fun. So my pet peeve would be that people are so enamored of generative AI that they don't see the flaws in it, and that they're overselling things. And that really makes it harder for us to get to the value that is truly there. The corollary to that is seeing a kind of segregation or dichotomy between AI on the one side and data on the other. That has lots of manifestations, including even where budgets are being allocated and so forth. I think there's no such thing as AI without data.
Logically, yeah.
One's the fuel, the other one maybe is the fire. And so really it's one discipline. And my pet peeve is that people see one as having superseded or outdated the other. And as somebody who has actually been interested in AI all the way since the mid-1980s, that's frustrating, because I think AI, now that it's actionable, is fantastic. But if we lose sight of what makes it work well, then we're in for disappointment, and it's avoidable disappointment.
Yeah, all sizzle, no sausage. One of the things that was going through my mind as you were talking is I think you might have mentioned it earlier, is this sort of self-referential thing where part of the solution to some of these problems of data governance and data quality is going to be using not the very AI, but using AI techniques to try and harmonise that. Do we run the risk of building a system that effectively becomes just really great at amplifying errors?
If we're not careful, that'll happen. We'll build a self-perpetuating
nonsense
fake AI machine.
Yeah, nonsense machine. Yeah.
We don't want that. But the problem is, or the issue is, that there is so much data out there. There are so many discrete data sources out there that trying to govern all your data and catalog all your data and do that manually is futile. So there has to be a way to use AI to do that. But again, it goes back to what I said before. I think practitioners should work at the low level and understand it, right? And then delegate that work with knowledge of how it's done, delegate that away to automation, and then be able to come back and check on it.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice. We've got time for one more question, I think, before we have to wrap. It may be a summary of what you've just talked about, but what do you think is the biggest or some of the biggest opportunities, and equal and opposite most pressing challenges when we think about enterprise AI?
One opportunity is simply going to be that a lot of the data that we have classified as dark data will start to be usable. That needing to take the unstructured and manually structure it before we can analyze it That was a lot of very front-loaded work, right? That will flatten out, and that should put enterprises in all industries in a place where they can be more competitive and more efficient. And I don't know, it's almost a cliche, but get to the point where the low value work is not something they have to spend as much time on. So that's a big opportunity. Again, though, we have challenges and pitfalls along the way before we get there, and I hope that awareness of that gets greater.
No, I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. It's been really great. If people want to learn more or get in touch, where can they go?
Andrew Brust, all one word, is my social media presence on most platforms. Mm-hmm. And bluebadgeinsights.com would be the website for our proud little company.
I love it.
And that should do it.
Andrew, it's been a fantastic conversation. Looking forward to getting you back on at some point in time.
That would be my pleasure once again.
Thanks to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast, and special thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Please feel free to reach out to Cloudera on social media, at Cloudera on LinkedIn, with any questions for our guests or feedback for future episodes. We'll see you next week.